I want to start by following up on the questions of my colleague from Alabama, because Minnesota is also home to, I think, more than 300 community banks. We're really blessed that we have such a diverse financial ecosystem in Minnesota. And when, Silicon Valley Bank and Signature Bank, when all of that crash happened a few years ago, I mean, of course, there was a lot of anxiety amongst all of the financial institutions about kind of what this fear factor was going to mean for them. But at the end of the day, I think I pretty much have this right. Because those small banks were so rooted in their communities and were so trusted by their customers, everything just sort of settled down, I guess is the way I would describe it. So I want to follow up on this question. How can we? I'm convinced that we need to raise the deposit insurance cap. The idea of indexing it makes total sense to me. But my question, I guess, maybe to Mr. Kelly and to start with is, how can we make sure that we're also reflecting the needs of these smaller banks and that we are not imposing unnecessary costs on them or just making it more difficult for them as we also want to have sort of the benefit of a higher cap?
Thank you, Senator Smith, for the question. I would tell you it really, the foundation of this is our leadership locally. To your point, we had moved into your market in 2022, and this happened in 2023, and we got just a couple of calls about our stability as an institution there in the Twin Cities. But through our relationship, that water did calm down. We went to events like chamber events and other nonprofits, and that question was continuously open: is my money safe? And I think we have to be the leaders to help set the tone that we are looking after this not only in crisis, but in moments of calm. And so I thank you for your question on this. Again, thank my colleagues because they've done a great job in looking at the research as it relates to their banking. Bob just mentioned these numbers. I think the intent is we need action now on this topic.
And we can do this without imposing additional burdens or costs on these small community banks that are, honestly quite stable.
Well, we've talked about the data. We need to look at both sides of that. So I can't commit to what it will cost, but I think we can approach this in a reasonable manner and such that we do provide that stability and confidence, as was the mission of the FDIC.
Mr. Harrison, there's been conversation today about how, and this is my view of it, that in a lot of ways our financial, this is my words, not yours, that our financial system is sort of rigged to help the big banks, the biggest banks, I mean to say, the GSIBs. And sometimes we might be putting mid-sized banks, not to mention small banks, at a competitive disadvantage because of that implicit guarantee that the big banks, the biggest banks, have. So I'm concerned that the $250 billion threshold that is in the Hagerty and also Brooks legislation, I'm wondering whether that's the right threshold, whether that doesn't create some sort of perverse disincentive for mid-sized banks that fill a very particular and important niche, at least in Minnesota's financial ecosystem. Could you speak to that?
Thank you for the question, Senator. The mid-sized banks, really what we're looking for is a level playing field, and I don't think we have that. And that goes to the meat of your question. So what is the right number on the upper end? I think many of the larger banks, talking to my peers, larger peers, they also saw deposits leave. The concern is if we do nothing, the deposits will continue to drift towards the largest banks. And not having some type of coverage, and the sooner the better, would continue that trend.
And I would agree with you on that. I think that that's something that we should really look at, and that kind of deposit migration is completely unrelated to the underlying stability of the bank and the management of the bank. It has to do with this sort of perceived additional safety that can be achieved by being at banks that are going to get bailed out because they're systemically significant.
And I know we talked about a former employer that didn't lose deposits, but many of the larger banks did, and they still went to the GSIBs.
Thank you very much. I yield back, Mr.